Welcome to Defiance Daily, dispatches for the Defiant. I am your host, Miles Taylor. There is a lot to cover today, folks. The walls are closing in on the Trump administration on a very controversial issue. Donald Trump promised to release sensitive files, and then a controversy got worse, and he backtracked, and now Congress is demanding to see them. And the administration seems like it may be in the middle of a cover-up. If that sounds familiar to you, it's because it is. But we're not talking about the Epstein files. We are talking about the Trump regime's illegal boat strikes in the Caribbean. But this is repeating the same beats of the story we saw with the Epstein saga. Only this time, it is even more serious. Because rather than covering up alleged sex crimes, the administration might be covering up murder. A bipartisan group of former ethics officials today is asking for a formal inquiry into the legal opinion justifying those strikes in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific as more and more and more legal experts pile on, claiming that those strikes are illegal. Meanwhile, Congress is withholding money from the Pentagon until they get answers. And a coalition of advocacy groups today announced they are suing the Pentagon, saying that those strikes are illegal and demanding more information. What's more, friends, just before this program started, U.S. Senator and Senate Majority Leader John Thune called for the videos to be released from the administration. Like I said, the walls are closing in on Donald Trump. After talking about that, we will get to something else, which is that Donald Trump is speaking shortly tonight in about an hour in Pennsylvania, talking about how to get the affordability crisis in this country under control. This is going to be an interesting speech because that crisis is one that Donald Trump created. Meanwhile, we will have former FBI official and national security expert Frank Figliuzzi on with us today to talk about all of this. And I will be joined later by my Defiance.org co-founder, Xander Schultz, which is great because I still have this terrible cold and I'm starting to lose my voice. So he will be a welcome guest on the show today. This is Defiance Daily, dispatches for the Defiant. All right, friends, let's go into the first one today. First up is the issue that will not die, even if Donald Trump and his administration want the targets to be sent to the bottom of the ocean. Now, more than 24 airstrikes have happened in the Caribbean and the Pacific, killing more than 80 people as part of this alleged campaign to go after drug cartels. And now everyone on the planet is demanding answers from the Trump administration. And they are dragging their feet just as hard as they did on the Epstein files. Now Congress is getting mad and demanding answers. Ethics watchdogs are crying foul and demanding an investigation. And now the Trump administration, as I noted earlier, is being sued over these strikes. Let's start with Congress, which is hitting the issue hard. I want you to take a listen to this story from CBS News about what's happening.
As Congress works to pass a bill authorizing more than $900 billion in defense spending, there is a provision inside the act targeted at getting video of U.S. boat strikes on alleged drug boats near Venezuela. The bottom line, until lawmakers get their hands on that video, part of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's travel budget will be withheld. CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns is live from Capitol Hill. So, Caitlin, that provision raised some eyebrows. So what are lawmakers saying about the bill on the Hill?
Well, Reed, here's the thing with a bill that's over nearly 900 pages long. Things are going to get tucked in, and this is one of them. This was something that was not necessarily expected, but has made it into a bipartisan version of this bill. This is nearly $1 trillion in Pentagon spending, and this bill is passed every year. It's one of the few bipartisan bills that Capitol Hill produces, and it usually flies through with bipartisan support. It essentially directs all of the Pentagon policy as well as what to do with the funding it is allocating towards the Pentagon. And tucked in there is a provision that says that they will withhold about a quarter of the Secretary's travel budget if he does not release the tapes of that Venezuela boat strike to members of Congress.
I'm going to tell you that when I saw that story break, I said, finally, Congress is joining the defiance. We have needed Congress to stand up on this issue for a while. And I will say, if you want to join the defiance as well and join us in putting pressure on Congress over this issue and helping to push back legally against the Trump administration on this issue, come be a part of the team. Come be a part of the Club for Courageous Americans. If you have not yet, check out defiance.org. You can also follow us on Substack at defiance.news or on YouTube and on all socials at defiance.org. Check that out. Look at how we are pushing back when it comes to stories like this and doing things in the real world rather than just doom scrolling. I will also say, as a former appropriations staffer on Capitol Hill, I was once a budget hawk up there. It may not sound like this is a big deal, but it is. It's a big deal because Congress is basically going to hold on to Pete Hegseth's allowance until he coughs up the files. And that can have very real implications. And I would know because I've also been on the other side of this. I've been in an administration when Congress said, we're not going to give you your travel money unless you give us something we want. That means Pete Hegseth can't get on an airplane to go fly to Indonesia or a base in California. He'll have to go fly coach instead of on his military jet if he doesn't give them those files. At least they're going to take a big chunk out of that travel budget. It could be more serious, yes, but it's important to show that there's something bipartisan happening. Congress is now getting in the fight here. But it gets worse for the administration because a group of former government watchdogs are now calling for an investigation, not just into the controversial September 2nd strike, the one where survivors were killed while clinging to the hull of their ship, but into the entire program overall. Now, let me read you this bit from CBS News. A bipartisan group of former federal ethics officials is asking for an internal Justice Department investigation into the legal opinion justifying U.S. military strikes on suspected drug-running boats. The ex-officials sent a request Tuesday to the Justice Department's Office of Professional Responsibility calling for a, quote, immediate investigation into whether members of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel violated their professional legal responsibilities in preparing legal guidance that justified the unilateral use of lethal force against civilian foreign nationals, including drug smugglers. Now, that group includes Norm Eisen, Richard Painter, and Virginia Cantor, who served as ethics counsels for Presidents George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton, respectively. Now, I'm going to put a pin in that name, Norm Eisen. We're going to talk about that in a little bit because Defiance.org is collaborating with Norm and his group and their efforts as part of this probe and other potential probes. The group's request for a formal inquiry said, quote, the result of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel's opinion, free rein for the government to murder and assassinate foreign individuals, is shocking and certainly raises the most profound legal ethics concerns. Okay, a lot going on here, folks, but that is not all. Because now the Trump administration, as I alluded to earlier, is also getting sued over all of this. Here's the story. A coalition of advocacy groups filed a lawsuit Tuesday against the Trump administration seeking the immediate release of the memo that provides the legal justification for these strikes. The complaint filed in federal court in Manhattan argues that the deadly strikes, which have killed at least 87 people since September, are illegal. And the filing requests that the court order the Justice, State, and Defense Departments to immediately search all records regarding the legal reasoning behind this military campaign. Now, that suit was brought by the ACLU and other plaintiffs, including the Center for Constitutional Rights. And of course, all of this, friends, comes as the man who was in charge, at least initially, of overseeing these strikes, just spoke to members of Congress on Capitol Hill. That's Admiral Alvin Halsey, who was the head of U.S. Southern Command, and actually still is for the next couple of days. He retires officially on Friday. And according to reports, he had pushed back hard on the administration over these strikes, which led to his resignation. And as the Associated Press reported, today Halsey briefed the chair and ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee in a classified video call. Lawmakers pressed him on those strikes, and we are likely to be starting to get the details of those conversations in the coming hours. Those meetings have ended, and we're going to keep on this and let you know, including during this program, if we see any breaking news on this front. So take that all together, and you will see, as I noted at the top, that the walls are closing in on the administration. People are demanding accountability from the Congress to watchdog groups and beyond. Now, I'm going to bring in my friend and Defiance.org co-founder, Xander Schultz, into the conversation to talk a little bit more about this. Xander, welcome.
What's up, buddy? How you doing?
Well, a lot going on, my friend, a lot going on. The administration, it started off, last week, this controversy felt like it was boiling. Now it feels like it's boiling over. I mean, I want to get your take. What's your sense of how the public is now responding to this and tuning into something that might have been an esoteric issue to them before?
I'm happy you asked that. I privately texted you this, I think, last week as well. As a member of the public, it's sometimes hard to differentiate what is a totally anomalous way the Trump regime is behaving versus what is business as usual in Washington. And, an everyday person like myself, that's aware of, the Pentagon papers or the Iran-Contra affair, maybe thinks there's things happening in the shadows all the time in Washington. You're someone who's been in the room a lot. And I think it would be really helpful for everyday people like me to understand from someone like you, how and why is this much more different than maybe some of the things the public isn't privy to that are happening? We just went through a war on terror and we weren't sure, all the time what was going on there. How outside the norm of this, of business as usual is this?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that question. I mean, and gave me kind of the opening to talk about that exchange we had because, you had asked me more specifically, how were the airstrikes during the war on terror against, terror suspects different than this? And my response to you was basically, in that instance, you had armed individuals who had declared war against the United States, and the ones that were hit typically did represent a literal imminent threat to the United States. Now, the administration is saying that about the drug boat, but let me draw a contrast. When it was the Obama administration or Bush administration launching drone strikes against terrorists, this was often individuals who were actively plotting attacks in the United States. And by actively, I mean sometimes these were folks who were sitting on their laptops, doing operational planning, talking to someone in San Francisco or New York City, getting ready to basically tell them, go shoot a bunch of Americans. And, that's what you would define as imminent threat. And so there was this drone strike, effort widely reported against those terror suspects. The difference here, of course, Xander, is you've got people who are far away from the United States in boats that could easily be intercepted, in boats which we found out weren't even headed to the United States. But to put an analogy to it, I mean, the example I gave you is it would be like if someone you knew went to another country and bought drugs to bring back to the United States to sell, and rather than getting handcuffed at the airport, the police officer just pulled out his gun and shot the guy. I mean, that's, wow, you would think, what an insane, dramatic...
Outside the bounds of our processes.
That's right. And you would say that the person committing the bigger crime there was not the one with drugs in their pocket. It was the police officer who decided to murder the suspect rather than arrest them. And that's what we're talking about here. That's sort of the escalation. But, I think you had noted to me, it seems like folks are starting to realize that this issue represents a lot of the things that we are trying to defy about what the Trump administration's doing. It's all of these abuses of power are wrapped into this one thing. And I don't know if you might want to tease this a little bit, but tomorrow we're going to be talking about how groups are going on legal offense against those abuses of power and how members of Defiance.org and the wider public can get involved in that.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit about our corporate accountability conversation we had and that effort as well, that the Constitution can't protect us if we don't fight for it. And we saw with the corporations, they were capitulating. They could protect free speech, but they decided not to. They decided to not even have that fight. And so legal offense and the willingness to make sure the executive branch can't act autonomously and has to act inside the bounds of our processes is is incredibly important because we're already essentially living in a monarchy if we don't fight for that and win in those ways. And so, this reminds me a lot of the other things we've covered thus far and the fights we've had thus far. We need to, wherever we can, fight and win to reestablish our processes and checks and balances in this country.
Well, I will say, I noted for listeners earlier, the name Norm Eisen was mentioned in that story. And Norm is, I think, one of the biggest, legal fighters in America. If you want to talk about people who are going on legal offense against the Trump administration, it's Norm and his organization, the Democracy Defenders Fund. Now, Norm had served as a National Security Council official in the Obama administration and later became a U.S. ambassador to Croatia during that administration. And now he runs this organization. He's going to be here with us tomorrow night, right in this time slot, talking about a partnership that we're going to launch where we're going to support some of their efforts to go on to offense against this administration on some of these abuses of power. And one of those, which we can report today, is that Norm and his colleagues are working to push back and demand these internal probes, these watchdog probes into the administration for apparently crafting a legal memo that says, yes, Mr. President, you can go murder unarmed people, in boats in the middle of the ocean if you want to. So, kudos to Norm for that. I will look forward to, asking him about that tomorrow night, but also to sharing with listeners ways they can personally get involved in that fight to go on legal offense and not just defense against this administration.
Miles, can I ask you, why do you think things are changing on the Hill? It's not like this is the first thing the Trump administration has done that feels completely outside the bounds of the norm. But to your point, in the clips you just showed, it does feel like there is more political will than maybe any point in this current administration since he came into office this time around. Why do you think that is? Why does it feel like there's a different energy around this?
Well, on this issue in particular, and, I also want to ask that question to our guest who we're going to bring in a moment. But on this issue in particular, Xander, I think because members of Congress, look, they are oppressed people. They have to go out every day and defend their actions in the media and to their constituents. And as soon as the video associated with an issue starts to look bad, they're going to have a tough time defending it. And I think a lot of these members of Congress are seeing that even though drug dealers are bad and these alleged drug smugglers are folks that Americans want the government to go after, they also recognize that your average American doesn't understand why you have to murder someone who you could easily arrest. And people are also very affected potentially by that imagery. And so I think you've got these members of Congress getting nervous, especially because now they know it's likely these videos are going to be released. And, you see innocent people holding on to a capsized boat. Well, I don't want to necessarily say innocent. I mean, they were indeed, seem to be smuggling drugs, but unarmed people grabbing onto the hull of a boat who may have been flagging for help, just eviscerated by your government, that looks to a layperson like murder. And that's going to be a hard thing for them to defend. But I would say bigger picture, Xander, you are starting to see some chinks in the armor of the MAGA movement with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene breaking from the president. And I think that's giving air cover to others to come forward and do the same.
It's interesting. Shout out to journalism. I mean, like it's incredible how often a single image changes the tide of these massive subjects that have maybe been debated for years or whatnot. You think about Napalm Girl or the dogs biting the children in the civil rights movement, or when I was doing refugee work, Elon Kurdi, the young Syrian boy that washed up on shore and whatnot. So it sounds like this is aligned with that, and just speaks to the power of journalism and media continuing to put these pressing issues in front of people. Okay. You're gonna make it over there.
You can tell this this cold is killing me.
Yeah.
Let's bring in Frank. You ask him the first question.
There we go. We're waiting on Frank to jump in here.
I'm here. I don't know if you.
Oh, hey Frank, I don't see you. There you are. Hey buddy, how you doing?
Yeah. Good. I always like to be introduced by a host who says I can no longer speak. Let's introduce Frank.
We're running a tip-top shop over here.
Frank, I'm doing you a favor by
Yeah.
keeping the audio off. If you could only hear what's happening when I hit mute, you can see
Oh.
the video of it, but woo, it's
I,
bad, brother.
I sympathize, I empathize, and I get it. Plus, I get to say almost whatever I want to say. You can't ever do
No,
that.
no, I'm not going to let you say that. I'm going to give the caveat first, which is, again, senior former FBI official, rock star, national security analyst. Don't let him lie to you.
Okay. All right, Xander will take
Over
care.
to you, Xander.
Yeah.
Frank, the good news is if this gets 20% worse with Miles, we're gonna have him sing that "The Skies Are Blue." He's gonna start singing that song for us.
Louis Armstrong.
Yeah, Louis Armstrong. So if
Okay.
it gets a little worse, we actually get to totally pivot into a live concert, which is really
Excellent.
exciting.
I'm there for
Look,
it.
I think I just want to ask broad kind of your reaction on the situation right now, these boat
Yeah.
strikes and whatnot. I just want to hear where your head's at broadly on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, this is the beauty of being able to go on whenever you want to go on. As Miles said, we have Admiral Halsey now just finishing and wrapping up briefings to the Hill on this. We're going to start slowly but surely getting the facts here. And, you know, Miles had asked you a question about why is this happening now? Why are we seeing this kind of bright spot of bipartisan pushback on this? And as was always the case, when a dam starts to crack, engineers will tell you there's multiple stress points to blame for this, right? And I think that's similar here, which means number one, the polling is showing that Trump is weaker than ever on multiple areas. Number two, and I think you alluded to this. Look, we've got a video. We have videos. We can get. You can get your hands around this. You can get your mind around something like this. People have died who seem to have been simply trying to survive. You've got an admiral who did the right thing, seemingly in retiring early. And that, I can't emphasize enough how much just one leader doing the right thing can embolden others. So that's happening in the form of Admiral Halsey, a respected leader. And you've got more facts coming out. What are those facts? Well, the boat was blown to bits and they're clinging to a capsized piece of the boat. Oh, by the way, now we're hearing from the other admiral, Bradley, again, a decorated Navy SEAL admiral, who says, well, the boat was actually not coming to America. It was going to Suriname. Oh my God. So the imminent threat that you're claiming doesn't really exist, does it? There are plenty of points where you could have interdicted this boat. And your argument that they posed some kind of imminent threat to, quote, continue their mission, whatever the hell that was, to Suriname. Well, that's interesting because previously, when you had survivors in the water, you rescued them. So I think all of these variables have come together for a bipartisan bright spot, which is, you know what? The other thing, let's not forget liability in terms of it's members of Congress and their grandkids someday saying, this was on your watch, Grandpa. Wasn't this on your watch where we were killing people in the water? And I think all of that comes together, and that's what we're seeing here. But it is an overriding display of weakness being perceived by Congress. And let's not forget another variable: they don't like Hegseth. Hegseth's an embarrassment. They know they held their nose and voted for him, and they're now regretting it.
What's victory look like here? What's the best? Paint the happy path for me. What is this? If the momentum keeps going the way it is, what can be achieved here?
So you know that I'm not the political guy. I'm the national security guy. So victory for me is measured in a slightly different way, which is, hey, something that where the United States is seen as correcting itself in terms of human rights, its own constitution, and the rule of law, and is putting back in place some check on power. And so you guys mentioned just a minute ago, hey, DOJ has become a player in this and is being asked some hard questions about the degree to which they ruled that this was all legal. And we need that kind of inquiry to show people we're asking the hard questions of our legal system, because that has to rule the day. And the idea, and again, I'm gonna be biased here because I spent 25 years in federal law enforcement and intelligence, and I believe in the criminal justice system. So I would also measure victory as a reapproach to this question of why must we go right to the military solution for what is a criminal problem? Why don't if Maduro is that bad, why aren't we pulling a Manuel Noriega and indicting him and grabbing him?
Right.
And doesn't that send a stronger message to the world that we're serious about drugs, rather than undermining our own standing by saying we just blow people out of the water? And you guys gave an analogy earlier about, hey, yeah, like what if we the cops just shot a guy coming into the airport with drugs? Well, let me tweak that, because that's actually a better scenario than what we have right now. Because let me tweak that scenario. Number one, your scenario said the guy's coming in with drugs. We don't know that these boats are all 100% laden with drugs. We simply don't know. Why don't we know? The Pentagon refuses to give a fulsome intelligence briefing. Number two, let me change the scenario. He's not flying. This guy of yours is not flying into a U.S. airport. But now, since we know that the boat was destined for Suriname, maybe the guy's flying to London, and he might book a ticket to the United States, and we shoot him in London. And
That's right.
Right. So the scenario you gave of shooting a guy at the airport is better than what we're dealing with right now.
Frank, what I need is an airstrike against this cold that I've got, this head cold and the tickle in my throat. So if you could launch that airstrike,
I think that's called Flonase. I think that's what that is.
Flonase is airstrike.
I will tell you right now. You could be putting out propaganda and misinformation, but right now we have more intelligence available to us that you're suffering from a cold than we do about any intel that these guys are all 100% drug couriers.
Well, I will say officially this episode is sponsored by Flonase airstrikes for the common cold.
We're targeting that Flonase.
Well, Frank, I do want to ask you a little further down the road. I think there are going to be investigations here into the administration. I mean, you just saw Norm Eisen and Richard Painter put out that call today for the watchdog, OPR, within the Justice Department to start investigating basically the Justice Department lawyers who conceived of this memo to give this thing legal authorization, which we can talk about. What has leaked about that memo is insane beyond belief. And if we have time, I'll get into it. I mean, the memo sounds like something cooked up by a first-year law student that thinks they're clever. But now that's could be because they purged a lot of people from the Justice Department in this second administration. But I think it's reasonable to predict that this issue is going to be one of the first issues that a next administration puts this administration under federal investigation for. In fact, I would be blown away if your former agency, the FBI, is not involved in probes and inquiries about what is being said right now to the American people about these strikes, about who knew what when, in terms of individuals who might have known that innocent or unarmed people, civilians, could be killed in these strikes. What would that look like? I mean, let's imagine it's 2029 and an opposition administration has come in, a Democratic administration, Trump administration's gone, and an investigation is opened here. What does that even begin to look like at the ground level for the FBI? Because I think people's wheels are starting to turn here, and I'm hearing members of Congress saying this investigation is going to go on for years.
Yeah, I mean, first there's a couple of things we have to overcome. First, I in no particular order, I firmly believe Trump's likely to issue blanket pardons to many people in this administration on his way out if he ever leaves. So we're going to have to deal with that kind of unprecedented situation. And there's going to be, I'm not in the movie review business, but 3 weeks ago, I actually did a movie review on my Substack, I saw the movie Nuremberg, which is out now in theaters, and boy, do I highly recommend it. Because if you're looking for hope in this rather dark time, the story of the Nuremberg trials post Hitler's death is one to give you hope about the ability of humankind to hold each other accountable, and that's what happened after after the Germans went down. And it's not that I'm comparing this administration to the Nazi regime yet, but rather just saying there's a form of accountability that might even include, Miles, an international tribunal, which is what Nuremberg was. The US, France, England, and Russia, believe it or not, deciding they were going to do this and give prosecutors to the cause. So that it could look like that. Now, we've got a Supreme Court decision that's going to get in the way also, which is, don't forget, we've got a Supreme Court ruling that says the president is immune from questioning regarding official acts. Essentially, what the president does is legal, and you can't even look. This got my attention right away with that Supreme Court decision because I'm an investigator by trade. You can't even look at the work product that got the president to a decision. So don't be surprised if, and when the time comes, you hear the Trump people say, hold on, we've got a Supreme Court decision. All of this legal discussion at DOJ and the DOD lawyers was essentially to present the president. Now, he'll run in the opposite direction. I guarantee you, right? He's already started to do it.
You don't think he'll take responsibility? I've always known him as a guy who really liked to take responsibility, especially when things get bad. You know, he's the first to say, you know what?
Yeah.
I own this. You know, I told you guys to go do that.
Yeah. He's already in the last 24 hours. What has he said? He's backtracked from, you know, I saw the video. He's saying, hey, I'm okay with whatever Hegseth decides. So yes, we're seeing the backpedaling, but I guarantee you, at some point, somebody briefed him in the Oval Office saying, we've got standing orders, sir, just to let you know that we're going to shoot people out of the water. And here's what happened with survivors. And he's going to be unable to run away from those communications. But again, somebody's going to raise the Supreme Court decision saying you can't even, not only is he immune, you can't even look at the paperwork that got him to that decision point. So I think that's going to be a problem. Do I think someday there'll be accountability? I hope so, but there's a lot of hurdles in the way. Would the FBI be the investigative agency? I think we're looking at bigger than that. I think we're looking at kind of a joint congressional a trial, impeachments, post facto impeachment. We're looking at like I said, an international effort. Could the International Criminal Court get involved? Maybe. It's an astounding thought, getting us to accountability when we're right now just trying to get the things.
I want to ask, while I have you two national security experts here, what are the risks the United States faces by continuing to commit these illegal, violent acts? Like, I think about how the world oriented against Putin, right? You think about how NATO's growth and the economic sanctions, everything. This is pre even the invasion of Ukraine. If America is viewed in a similar light, that we have unchecked power and we're committing essentially illegal killings, what is the national security risk of not winning this fight, not checking the administration?
Well, I'm happy to go first. We've already seen one consequence, which is that the UK has already said we're very uncomfortable sharing any more intelligence about the Western Hemisphere drug running. We think our intel's being misused, and we don't want to be a part of murder. I'm paraphrasing, but when your strongest ally in the world says, "Time out. We're not going to share intel because you guys might be killing people unlawfully," you better pay attention to that. That weakens you tremendously.
Yeah, I mean, I can't beat that. I mean,
go ahead, Miles.
Well, I was just going to say, Frank's completely right there. And I've never seen anything quite like that. I mean, you know, we did a lot of stupid things in the first Trump administration, don't get me wrong, but never did we end up in a position where our British allies said to us, we got to cut you off. I mean, that is unprecedented. And I spent a lot of time with our British counterparts, as I'm sure Frank did, on really sensitive, difficult issues that were, you know, difficult from a national security standpoint, but that were also politically sensitive issues. And we still worked very closely together. So it just speaks so loudly that our closest partner on the planet did exactly as Frank said and said, we got to cut off the sharing. We're not going to be a party to this. Whether they said to the administration, we're not going to be complicit in murder is not something we necessarily know, but it sure looks like that's how the Brits were acting.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Frank, can I ask you a question before we let you go here? I think we've got a couple of more minutes, but it's on the bigger picture here, which you've been talking about the past few days, which is the administration's pivot in foreign policy and national security back to the homeland, which on the surface, when people hear that, they think, well, that makes sense. You know, the president of the United States just released his national security strategy on Friday, which was interesting. That's kind of a news dump day, but releases his national security strategy, and it focuses on bringing attention back to the U.S. homeland. But that's not as comforting as you might think, because Donald Trump is not contemplating that in terms of how do I better protect the American people. We're talking about exactly this issue, the use of force closer to the United States, bringing these tools from the war on terror from foreign battlefields into American city streets. That's how those documents read to me, is that he wants to reorient to crackdowns inside the Western Hemisphere and the homeland, which sounds a lot more autocratic than it does, national security hawkish. But I want to get your take on the overall strategy and what it means that Donald Trump is pivoting to the homeland.
Yeah, and you're right to raise the issue of this will, on a surface with a MAGA crowd that may not read a national security strategy, it's going to sound very appealing to them. But let's get beyond that initial surface. A president is required to issue a national security strategy annually or periodically. It sets the tone and serves as a guidebook for the entire national security community and for our allies and adversaries who read it, by the way, with great interest. And so what's different about this one? The president is saying, if it's not in our backyard, I don't care. And again, like you said, that might appeal to a lot of people. Yep, I don't care, America first, America only. It jettisons the idea that we should have friends and allies. It's nice to have friends who have your back. But worse than that, it actually attacks our friends and allies. It actually lectures the European Union, says that they, of all things, are anti-democracy. It says that they're crazy to support Ukraine. They're going against their own people's wishes. It lectures Ukraine by saying that you're facing civilizational erasure. Your civilization is going to cease to exist. And what does he mean by that? You've got a lot of brown people coming in. That's the takeaway there. And you've got to stop that. Brown is bad. You're facing civilizational erasure. What else? With regard to Russia, there's an overriding naivete here. If you gave this task to a bunch of businessmen who weren't very good businessmen and said, please write a national security strategy, this is what it would look like. Everything is financially transactional. It's not about standing for anything. It's about falling for anything, because you're falling for the naive idea that Russia can be handled through business deals, that Putin's not really an adversary. This is where the naivete comes in. And by the way, this gets issued on the day that Putin comes out and goes, I'm just playing with you on Ukraine. I'm not negotiating, right? All of the meetings that Kushner had in Witkoff, Miami, Moscow, never mind. I'm not really serious about negotiating. But yet our national security strategy says, Russia's a place where we can cut deals. Middle East is all about business deals. Let's not worry about human rights. Remember, we had a formal dinner for Crown Prince MBS, who dismembered a member of the media. So everything's transactional. Nothing involves standing for anything. We're ceding our global power. And what are we saying in this document? Trump is saying the guy with the biggest stick rules the region. You got the biggest army, China, you rule your region. And Russia, you're going to go back to the days when you handled and balanced Europe. And we want no part of this because we're busy stopping vessels coming out of Venezuela. That, I'm paraphrasing, but not much. That's this new national security strategy. Naive, dangerous, and lecturing our allies that they're losing, quote, their civilization, not really further defined other than, boy, you have a lot of brown people. That's
yeah,
my
it feels a lot like we got into Doc Brown's DeLorean and went back like 150 years in terms of foreign policy. I mean, it's a massive regression. And by the way, our hundreds of friends over at Substack are reminding me that this did not drop on Friday night. It actually dropped late Thursday night.
It leaked Thursday.
Leaked on Thursday and then dropped on Friday. But nevertheless, the administration didn't seem keen to tout this. And I'll add one note. I mean, one of the reasons why I think is because, and I don't mean this facetiously, the document is too long for Donald Trump. It's a 33-page document. And I went through this exercise in the first Trump administration. I helped co-write the first Trump national security strategy, and the document was more than 30 pages. He doesn't read a document more than a page. And so, the administration had a hard time doing a rollout because they're like, well, the president doesn't really know what's in the document. And you can't get him to read 30 pages. Like, that's crazy. We could do a whole segment on that, Frank. Why can't we get the president of the United States to read 30 pages?
You're on the money. Somebody handed this to him to sign. And briefed him on it. And typically, I also had a part, in previous national security strategies with some input. But who weighs in on these things? The DNI, certainly, the CIA director, big time. The Secretary of State, big time. So let's look at the Secretary of State. There's the China portion of this document is astounding because it basically says we're going to cross our fingers and hope the status quo remains with regard to Taiwan. Let's hope for the best. That you're telling me Marco Rubio, who co-chaired the Senate Intelligence Committee and has the brief on China, absolutely planning to take Taiwan back. You're telling me he signed off on that we just hope for the best and that we should be cutting business deals with China. I don't know who wrote this, but I'm not sure Marco Rubio wrote it. People have just given up their knowledge, apparently.
Well, they've also given up their consciences. I'm not sure how Marco Rubio goes home each night realizing that he's doing the opposite on almost every single issue that he stood for before he came in. We've got to move on to our next story here. Frank Figliuzzi, total rock star, national security expert. If you're not following Frank on Substack, you have to. He makes me furious every day. He beats me to the punch on the best issues of the day, and he's got the most incisive analysis. And so I don't even try to cover most of the things Frank covers because he does it so much better. But please follow Frank, subscribe to Frank. He's outstanding and a friend of the program. So, Frank, thank you for joining us, my friend.
Thanks to both of you. Feel better, Miles. Take care.
Well, we'll see what happens at the rest of the program here. Xander, man, we're gonna tuck you down into the green room, and then if you're willing, we're gonna pull you back out of the green room.
As long as the green room's cozy.
Yeah, well,
I'll hang out there for a bit.
There's free water there and cough drops. Yeah.
All right. I'll hang out. I'll try to bring a couple back for you.
Fantastic. Well, the next thing we turn to, friends, is the affordability crisis. You know this crisis by another name, which is I hate going to the grocery store because it's all gotten awful. I can't stand going to the grocery store right now. Nothing is affordable. Now, I want to read you a bit from this terrific news analysis that was in the New York Times yesterday on this issue. This is how the story started off. On President Donald Trump's proclaimed Liberation Day in April, when he announced the tariffs that have upended global trade, he vowed that, quote, jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country. The imposition of taxes on exports, the president promised, will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers, leading to lower prices for Americans. That's what he promised in April. So far, it's not really worked out that way. The Times continues. At the White House on Monday, the president announced $12 billion in bailout money for America's farmers who have been battered in large part by these trade policies. And the tariffs continue to put upward pressure on prices, putting the Trump administration on the defensive over these deep public concerns about the cost of living. And yesterday, it was announced that today the president would go to Pennsylvania for the first of what the White House calls a series of speeches addressing the affordability problem, which last week Donald Trump dismissed as the greatest con job ever conceived by Democrats. Take a listen to what the president had to say.
The word affordability is a con job. They use the word affordability. It's a Democrat hoax. Look, affordability is a hoax.
A hoax. A hoax the president's apparently going to be talking about tonight in like 15 or 20 minutes. I'll get to that in a second. But his administration on this hoax is still trying to point fingers at the last administration for why prices are so high. Take a listen to Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins.
Many farmers we speak to say that there's another part of this, and that's the revenue side of things, that the tariffs are hurting them, that they've lost customers as a result. I want to play a clip from a guy by the name of John Bartman, who's a fifth-generation soybean and corn farmer, on how these farmers are struggling and why they're struggling. Here's what he told us.
This is the time of the year where all our bills are due. And farmers really need the money right now. And that's the very unfortunate thing. And this is Donald Trump's problem. He's the one that caused this. Right now, American factory workers are laid off, and many of our salesmen who sell farm equipment, sell seed, chemicals, they're not making any money right now, and that's being reflected in the economy.
What would you say to a farmer like that, Secretary Rollins?
Well, first of all, I would say God bless you for your work. Even if you're not a supporter of Donald Trump and not a supporter of what we're doing, I just am so grateful to you and to all those farmers out in America. The second thing I would say is that this is a crisis that has been in the making for years now. When the interest rates under the last administration went up 73%, labor went up 47%. The very seed and fertilizer guys he's talking about, maybe the salesman that he knows that his kids go to school with or he's in Sunday school with, maybe they're struggling, but those companies are actually making a ton of money.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like Brooke was basically saying that this guy might be wrong. Now, I know her. I worked with her in the first Trump administration. She's a nice person, but she pretty much dodged the issue here, which the president, I think, is going to have a tough time dodging tonight. I mentioned he's giving that speech shortly in Pennsylvania on the issue of affordability, one he claims is a hoax, but now he's giving a speech on it. In fact, he's apparently going to be doing a series of speeches around the country about affordability because it's not a hoax. People are living this every single day. And it's going to be an awkward speech to give because Donald Trump is the one who has made prices go up. Tariffs, folks, let me remind you again, are taxes. Now, the administration has said they are not. But then this incredible thing happened last month. They accidentally revealed the lie. And on what? Coffee. On the issue of coffee, which has gone up 40% because of Trump's tariffs, the administration admitted that the way that they were going to fix the problem is by lowering tariffs. There it is. That was it. That was the admission. The administration was making coffee more expensive with tariffs. It was imposing a tax on that product. Now, that issue is in front of the Supreme Court, which is going to decide whether or not the imposition of those tariffs was legal. But that, to me, was a concession. I want to bring Xander back into the conversation on this because, Xander, I imagine you, like most people, eat food and buy things at the store. How has that been feeling for you lately? Oh, we have you on mute.
Let me get back in here. I was saying I wasn't sure if it was the administration or the fact that Square keeps asking me to tip 30 to 35% every time I buy a latte, but it's good to know it was both because I was noticing my
can we
jump to $7 and $8.
I hope the president folds that into the affordability crisis.
Can we get a memorandum
issue?
on the recommended tips being 40% on those Squarespace
That's right.
readers? But yeah, I mean, there is always this conflict with his campaign, right? Which is price. We got used to very cheap prices due to globalization. And he said he was going to reindustrialize America and tariff the world, which in some ways I understand the attraction of that for many workers who are displaced by globalization. But those two things are going to be in conflict. Reindustrializing America and paying American wages is going to push up prices, and tariffing, putting tariffs on products from across the world is going to increase prices. And he never leaned into one or the other. He just said he was going to do both. So it was always going to be a massive issue.
Yeah. And, you point to something, Xander, I think that's really important, which is that nothing is basically affordable because of all of this. I mean, you and I have had these conversations. You add on top of that tip inflation, which, look, I want service workers to get tips, but tip inflation on top of tariffs and taxes has meant you just can't live anymore in the United States, the middle class lifestyle that just last year you were able to live. And I don't say this as someone who's sitting up on a pedestal. I mean, I got a decent little office right here, but I'll tell you, my wife and I go to the grocery store and we put stuff back on the shelves all the time. We have discussions about the products we are putting into the cart. Like, hey, is that too much to spend on cheese? Is that too much to spend on this? What was once a thoughtless exercise, driving to the grocery store, putting the stuff in, going back home, is now hey, where can we cut the corners to save money? I mean, this is just happening to everyone. It's more than a crisis. This feels like a 5-alarm fire for the middle class. And I've got to think that that's the type of thing that will have repercussions, that if people are going to find any issue to defy this administration on, it's this one.
You can't gaslight people that life is more affordable. It's the one thing. You can maybe blame someone else, and I'm surprised his path has been to dismiss that there's an affordability crisis instead of blaming the Democrats for the affordability crisis.
Well, he's doing both, but yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, but the Democrats did it, but it doesn't exist, but I'm going to talk about it tonight.
Right. Same thing with the Epstein files. They don't exist, and the Democrats made it, right? So,
and release them, but don't release them.
He usually places all the playbooks at once.
He takes all the positions.
But it does feel like the fastest path to being unpopular, even from your base, is to just tell people that they should be fine, stop crying about it, and their problems don't exist. It's just, and you know what? I want to say something else. It's really too bad, because I think there was this opportunity to, in a very intelligent way, tackle what has happened in America in terms of who we trade with and the trade partners that are becoming more powerful, but not becoming, economic or military allies of ours, who we're building up, the types of kind of labor that our purchasing power was supporting in terms of like unethical labor and whatnot, and the ability to reindustrialize around spaces that we were strong in and should be strong in and should have probably never shipped off. There was a version of this that centered the American worker and not just vengeance, as you've mentioned several times, that could have really been powerful. And unfortunately, it just feels like this whole economic policy is about him wielding king-like powers and not about having a new economic policy that supports Americans.
Well, and this is, I mean, just for you and I, such a fitting issue to agree on, because the first conversation you and I ever had was about how we had drastically different views on economics, right? I'm a small L libertarian on economics, and, you were much further to the left than me. And yet here we are now aligned on this issue because we have an administration that is wielding executive power to make life less affordable for Americans. I mean, it doesn't matter what your ideology is. It's very obvious what that problem is stop making life more expensive for all of us. Go fix that problem. I mean, it's just,
and you haven't brought back great jobs. Like the trade-off was going to be, if you were going to do this, you're going to reindustrialize America, and there would be all these great middle-class jobs that would exist. And that just hasn't happened. So at what point do you go, either the thesis was a lie or it's not working and we need to do something else?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, I'm going to take us, Xander, into our last segment here. And this is my favorite segment in the program. And then if you're willing, my friend, we'll pull you back into this one, and then we'll take some Q&A from our subscribers. So hopefully folks are ginning up questions to ask us here. But the final question for today's program, like I said, is my favorite segment, and it is, who is joining the Defiance? And I like today's answer because Trump engaged this year in this big revenge purge of government workers all over the place, lots of different agencies, and now a number of them are pushing back. And this is according to NPR. The story comes from them that 12 FBI agents fired this year for kneeling during the 2020 racial justice protests are now suing the Bureau and its director, Kash Patel. They argue they were unlawfully punished for trying to de-escalate a dangerous crowd outside the National Archives during the George Floyd protests. With nearly 200 years of combined experience, filings say the agents had no riot gear, no shields, no helmets, and were vastly outnumbered. So while the kneeling wasn't political, it was an attempt to calm a volatile situation. The Justice Department's Inspector General already reviewed the incident last year and found no misconduct, but after Donald Trump himself criticized it, the episode became a political flashpoint. And according to the lawsuit, when Kash Patel took over the FBI this year, he singled out these agents for retaliation. Several of them were stripped of supervisory roles, And then a new internal investigation was opened, and in September, all 12 were fired before that process was even finished. Their termination letters accused them of unprofessional conduct and a lack of impartiality that amounted to, quote, political weaponization. Kneeling on a knee, folks. Political weaponization. Anyway, the story continues. The lawsuit says Patel broke promises he made during his confirmation hearing to honor FBI review processes. It also says firing the agents disrupted ongoing investigations, including evidence work after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Finally, NPR says these former agents are now asking a federal court to reinstate them and restore their back pay. The FBI has declined to comment on the pending lawsuit. Xander, I think this is an awesome example of defiance. So many people this year, hundreds of people, according to Reuters, and thousands, depending on how you count it, have been directly targeted by the president, by the Oval Office for revenge, whether it's firings or executive orders against my family or former colleagues. The revenge campaign is enormous, and a lot of people have been scared to fight back because they're worried they'll get punished more. But these 12 FBI agents are saying, no way, you fired us wrongly, and for political reasons, we're going to sue you.
Yeah, another great example of using the courts for what they're good for. Their victory is a victory writ large. I'd also like the administration to put a consistent definition on what dangerous crowd is, because January 6th, apparently not a dangerous crowd. These guys, dangerous crowd. It just feels like I'd like one definition for it so I can know when I see it.
There was another very dangerous crowd, by the way, at the Berkeley campus last month. There were protesters at Berkeley, and the attorney general said it was domestic terrorism because it got so unruly. And I don't know if you remember this, Xander. What happened afterwards is a police report filed indicated that the domestic terrorism that happened is a guy had his neck chain stolen by another guy. So anyway, it depends on where the protest is happening.
I get it. That feels terroristic.
Yeah, but these folks are pushing back, which I think is extraordinary. And this also ties to our last story. You may think tariff prices and FBI agents, why do those both have to do with defiance? Well, on the tariff prices issue, there are real ways to push back against this administration, and people are starting to do it. And we highlighted a few of those groups last month who announced a big Black Friday boycott. I think the numbers are still coming in on how effective that was, but part of that boycott was aimed at companies that were capitulating to the Trump administration, including refusing to stand up to them on issues like tariffs. And now here on the FBI story, we would normally, at least in the first half of this year, look at these purges of federal workers and say, what can people possibly do? But now the tide is turning. People are doing things. People are defying. They are fighting back. They are bringing lawsuits. And I teased earlier and mentioned a few times with you that that's one of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow night on this program on our weekly briefing is how to go from legal defense onto legal offense against some of these moves.
Yeah. Yeah, as our friends at Whistleblower Aid would say, courage is contagious. And we're starting to see more and more of that as people realize that Trump is not a king. He can't autonomously decide to hurt individuals. We do have a legal system, and we need to use it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's take a few questions, Xander, from the chat. And just a reminder to folks, if you are a member of defiance.org, you can ask questions in the chat, or if you're a subscriber on defiance.news, you're also de facto a member of defiance.org, and so you can add questions into the chat. And we've got a few of those today. Stephen Russell asks, do you think Admiral Halsey resigned because of the second strike or because of the strikes in general? Stephen, that's a good question. It's even possible that while we've been sitting here, we've gotten more news about that. I haven't had a chance to sneak a look over at social media to see if we've gotten any headlines there. My speculation is it's probably the whole thing in general, and I suspect that that is what the admiral told those members of Congress today, is that he had given the president and the White House his best military advice, and including the Secretary of Defense. And I suspect that advice is that these strikes were misguided at best and potentially illegal at worst. He appears to have been ignored. And as a consequence of that, it looks like these strikes were taken out of his AOR, his area of responsibility, which he owns the Southern Hemisphere as the head of U.S. Southern Command, taken out of his AOR and given to the elite U.S. Special Operations Command to go do. And that in and of itself seems to me very, very fishy. that was done, and very well could have to do with the fact that Halsey had raised concerns. We got another question here from Frank Sanger, who asks, can't Hegseth simply slide money around? I don't know, Xander. I don't think we should let the defense secretary slide cash around. But I assume, Frank, the question you're asking is about if the Congress withholds those travel funds for the secretary. Now, again, that doesn't sound that outlandish. It doesn't sound like that's a huge consequence. But if Xander here was the Secretary of Defense, he couldn't run the whole operation from there in front of that American flag. You got to travel around constantly to do your job, and you got to go to places the president wants. And so when Congress says, we're going to hold on to your travel funds and rescind them, they didn't say all of them, but it makes it harder to do their job. And that sounds like a boring bureaucratic thing, but like I said, I've lived it on the other end, where Congress says, we're mad at you, DHS, about something when I was at DHS, and we're going to hold on to your travel money. Well, then we would get partway through the year, and the team that plans the secretary's trips, the advance team, says, hey, we can't go to this place this week because there's not the money until this thing happens. And it becomes this big frustration. And if they go slide money around, Frank, like you ask, technically that could be breaking the law, depending on how they do it. Now, I say that with the attendant caveat that this administration seems to have a deep and abiding inclination toward illegality. So it's certainly something they might look at. But I think the important thing here is the symbol. The symbol is that Congress is pushing back. And Xander, as you noted, people have been waiting a while, it feels like, to see bipartisan outrage over something, because MAGA had been so inclined to just do whatever the president wanted on most of these issues the past few months.
Miles, something that's striking to me that Frank mentioned earlier is that Congress doesn't like Hegseth. And is there an emerging, I'd love your take on this, is there an emergent strategy which is go after Trump's lieutenants? He doesn't really defend them or take it so personally when you go after them. You can build a winning coalition, bipartisan coalition, after going after those lieutenants. Are we seeing a playbook here for holding this administration accountable by kind of taking on the second in command in these different spaces?
It's a really good point. I get asked that a good bit. I think the answer is yes. And let me speak to this from personal experience. From the first administration, when cabinet members started to get targeted on specific policies, it was a much better leverage point than when the president was targeted. Donald Trump takes incoming fire all day long on these issues. He sort of relishes it. I mean, if he's not creating a controversy, he's upset and he tweets one into existence. But a lot of these cabinet members, they're not at the end of their careers. They think they're at the beginning of the best part of their careers. They're going to leave from having run a major department or agency and hopefully, go into the private sector and have their biggest job they've ever had after they leave an administration. So they're scared, a lot of them, when they get called out deeply on these issues, especially if they're accused of something like committing war crimes. I got to tell you, that doesn't really help on your resume to have, war crimes written on there. And so I do think that the targeting of Trump's lieutenants is helpful. And I mean, in a fair way. I mean, what we should not be doing is doxing these people and harassing these people. And
Sure.
You've seen some of those things happen before, though. I mean, in the first Trump administration, I saw some of those cabinet members who rightfully deserved repudiation, but who instead were like doxed and physically stalked and harassed. That's not okay. But we should be calling them out. We should be reaching out to them. And we saw this with our corporate enablers campaign that we supported last month, as we teamed up with some allies to do something similar, but with companies. The companies that are capitulating to Trump, is instead of just going after the brand amorphously, you communicate with the employees, you communicate with that CEO, and you say to people like, hey, Tim Cook, what would Steve Jobs have thought about you going into the Oval Office and giving golden gifts to Donald Trump? That wouldn't have seemed very courageous, right? And I think getting that messaging out there really does affect people.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that insight.
Last question we have here from Anne is, how can we make middle-class jobs to support families when they won't increase the federal, we're about to lose Miles again, when they won't increase the federal minimum wage? Xander, you want to take that one? It's right at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. It's a good question. It's very hard to. It's very hard to. The inflation has not moved, or the minimum wage has not moved at the pace of inflation, I think, since like 1981 or whatnot. The minimum wage should be 25 something dollars at this point. And now we have these bigger issues with AI and globalization and automation and whatnot, really threatening to our stability and our resilience as a country. And so in my opinion, we need a mix of a really strong minimum wage that allows people to build a stable life, and some sort of infrastructure that keeps us resilient in moments where we are finding ourselves unemployed or between careers and whatnot, because the pace of innovation is just absolutely devastating right now. I mean, the other thing we should talk about, though, and this is, Miles, yet again, another probably subject that you and I can agree on, despite on being on different kind of spectrums in terms of economic ideology. We need to build housing in this country. Like, a lot of what we talk about when we talk about loss of affordability is just the chunk of people's income that housing now occupies. And a lot of that, comes from my side. Ezra Klein talks about this really well, putting a lot of regulations in place that hurt people's ability to build. And so wages is definitely an issue, but we need to flood America with housing supply over the next decade or so. That would go a long way also.
Well, and that's one of those issues, you're right, that we would have normally disagreed on, because I would have said it was the far left that for decades layered regulation on top of regulation when it came to housing and made it suffocating to go build even something like an ADU on your property. And but there's more than just left-wing politics involved in that. I'm not accusing just the left, but I mean, that would have been the position I would have taken once upon a time. Now I would say, though, we have a huge opportunity here that's not even a partisan issue anymore, which is the innovation you mentioned, Xander, that does pose a threat to people's wages, also creates opportunity on ways for people to have a more affordable lifestyle. And housing is a great example. I mean, houses have basically been made the same way for the past 50 years, but there are now a burst of companies out there on the scene who are making not just tiny homes, but these incredible mass manufactured homes that don't feel mass manufactured and can be done really fast, very efficiently, very cheaply, using safe materials, healthy materials. And, I could probably list 6 of them right now, and it's been remarkable to watch. I mean, there's the company that's down in Texas that's literally 3D printing homes. They have a giant machine.
I was just about to mention them. It's incredible. For 10 grand, you get a house.
I used to work with a company called Kuby, C-U-B-Y, Kuby Technologies. Like, they're doing very interesting things. There's a whole bunch of different companies out there doing this, but the answer is not going to be any one of those companies. It's going to be, does the federal government get out of the way? Do state and local governments get out of the way? And do we harness innovation to make life more affordable again? And, Anne, I think that would be one of the answers to your question. It may not be satisfactory because, yes, something needs to happen with the minimum wage, but we also have to look at, again, overall, how much do things cost in our society? And as Xander notes, with housing being one of those big costs on everyone's budget, how do we bring that down? How can we bring that down through innovation? And again, we get back to the Trump administration. What is the administration doing about that? They seem to be doing the opposite. They seem to be making prices more expensive and life more expensive for most Americans. So that's something that we're not going to be shy in calling out. Xander, before I close this out, let me just ask you, I don't know what your answer to this question is going to be. What gives you hope right now, my friend, today on this Tuesday, December 9th?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I think it actually, this really got surfaced in the members meeting that we had last week, where I felt a sea change from when I was doing kind of Trump resistance work in his first term, which is a lot of people, when we were asking people what strategies do you want to see Defiance focus on, a lot of people talked about reaching out to MAGA members, young people, etc. I think there is a much healthier understanding that a lot of the people who supported Trump weren't the kind of deplorables that maybe they were being positioned as the first time around, but yet a kind of coalition of people, from former military members that were sick of the forever wars, and Trump, whether you believed him to be genuine or not, was calling them out and saying he didn't want them to continue, and he wouldn't allow them to continue. The 2A community of legal gun owners who felt like they basically didn't have a choice in kind of political parties that they could move towards. And, my cousin, I was just talking to the other day, he voted for Trump. He's in construction, and him, like a bunch of folks in a bunch of different industries, felt a supply side challenge when it came to the labor they were competing with, whether it was globalization or immigration or whatnot. And they were just trying to find a way to be kind of safe and have a career in this country. And so I think there's just a lot more empathy for how we ended up here and the voters who voted for Trump and their problems being real and the need to address those problems. And I think there's more awareness that we all kind of got sucked into these different algorithms and had our worldviews warped a little bit. And so I think the mix of that empathy and the understanding of the challenges of our information environment make us a much more mature country and movement as we try to figure out how to get out of this.
Oh, man, I'm so glad you said that. I will just say that's one of the hardest things to do amidst all of this is reintroduce empathy. And, we all get stuck in this wartime mode of, Trump is a threat to democracy and no one could possibly support him and they are all our enemies. Well, that dehumanization, the moment you cross that line and you say they're all our enemies because they supported him, you make it almost impossible to get us out of this crisis.
There's nowhere to go. Where are they going to go?
That's right. It leads to these spirals. All sides start to do it. I mean, we've seen this story throughout history is when you have civil conflict, it usually starts with one side dehumanizing the other, then the other dehumanizes, and they're both saying the other one's at fault. But in the process, they're both dehumanizing the other side. So that word you mentioned, empathy, is how a lot of this starts to get back on track. That's not to say I have to agree with the reason someone voted for Donald Trump, but to understand why they did, and in that understanding, start to build some of those political bridges. So, and you can do that, and you can defy abuses of power at the same time. You can do both of those things at the same time and create a more civil country.
Not only can you, we must. We must let people know we need to defy him, and we hear you. We hear your issues; they're real, and we will prioritize them when we build what's coming next in this country. Because the dismissal thing didn't work. The fact that we got this guy a second time shows you to the extent that we were dismissing people's problems. Because his first administration wasn't great. Miles, you were there. You wrote about it. Wasn't fantastic.
Not a fun time. No, wouldn't
and
recommend it to
we
anyone.
went back to that world because people felt that dismissed. So the bridge building and empathy piece, I just feel like we're in a much better spot than we used to be.
Well, and I'll close by saying, Xander, I feel every single day like the Defiance is getting bigger. And that's why I love that segment we close our programs with, who is joining the Defiance, because we actually every day have trouble deciding what that story is going to be because there are so many stories out there. And I would say to our subscribers, please do send us those stories. If you are on the members page, defiance.news, direct message us. If on any given day you spot a story you want us to cover, but especially in that category, who is joining the Defiance, send us examples. It doesn't have to be Ben Stiller. Yes, we used Ben Stiller last week. It doesn't have to be those 12 FBI agents. It can be a local example in your case. So nominate people into that for us, and we'll feature them on the program. Let me just say, Xander, thank you for saving my butt today, my friend. Almost really bit the dust. As I was, back there in the corner hacking and coughing and trying to come back to life, I thought, I think Xander's going to have to carry the rest of the program, and that's fine and that's great. But I came back to life. So thank you, my friend. And to everyone following us and listening to this conversation, please, if you're watching on Substack, hit the heart button if you liked today's episode. That helps us share this out to more people. It gets the Defiance in front of more folks. Hit that heart button. If you're watching on another platform, hit the like button. If there's a subscribe button there somewhere, or just hit all the buttons, like a kid that's in the elevator, just hit all the buttons. That's good in getting the word out. So thank you for that. And remember that 100% of subscriptions to Defiance News go to defiance.org, our action arm for fighting back against Trump's abuses of power. So please become a paid subscriber. If you subscribe on Substack, you automatically become a member of defiance.org. Or if you go to that domain, defiance.org, you can get full membership and know that every single week your support is going directly to the pro-democracy fight, not around some corner, not, to vague issues. You are directly helping to combat Trump's abuses of power. and supporting some of the most incredible groups around the country that are working to protect truth tellers and to call out corruption and to make sure we restore the rule of law in America. And tomorrow, in this program at the 5 p.m. hour, we will do exactly that. We will do our weekly mission briefing where we talk about the mission of the week, what we are doing explicitly to push back against those abuses of power. And we will be focusing on that theme we brought up earlier of going on legal offense and bringing groups on that will help do exactly that. So join us tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern, right here for that conversation. And make sure to subscribe to us on all social media platforms. We've got our social handles up. If you want to be the first to get updates from defiance.org, you can follow us at defiance.org on just about every platform where people post things. For now, friends, this has been Defiance Daily, dispatches for the Defiant. Thank you for joining us. Stay loud, stay brave, and stay together. Appreciate you.